Why talking to yourself feels natural but is rarely admitted. There's a voice that speaks when no one else is listening. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wait for permission. It simply begins somewhere between thought and sound, in a space only you can hear. It organizes what the day scattered. It rehearses what hasn't been said. It explains what no one bothered to clarify. And though it feels entirely natural, it's rarely mentioned, because admitting you talk to yourself even silently feels like confessing something strange. But it isn't strange. It's one of the most human things we do. If any part of this feels familiar to you, you're not alone. And if you ever feel like sharing your experience, the comments are open. The internal conversation that happens when no one is listening. The conversation begins in the quiet, not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that holds everything you haven't said out loud. It starts with a word, a phrase, a question directed at no one but yourself. And somehow, it feels like the most honest exchange you'll have all day. You don't plan it. It just surfaces while you're walking, waiting, staring at nothing in particular. The voice isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It simply fills the space between what happened and what you're trying to understand. It's the sound of your mind organizing itself, one sentence at a time. No one hears it. No one interrupts it. And maybe that's why it feels so natural. Because in that moment, you're both the speaker and the listener. You're the only audience that matters. And the conversation continues, unnoticed, until something else pulls you back into the world. There's a rhythm to it, a cadence that belongs only to you. The silent phrases used to organize the chaos of the day. The day doesn't arrive organized. It comes in fragments, tasks, half remembered, conversations left unfinished, decisions still waiting to be made. And somewhere in the middle of it all, you start speaking to yourself. Not out loud, just enough to sort through what feels scattered. You list things mentally. You repeat what needs to be done. You remind yourself of what matters and what can wait. The words aren't for anyone else. They're anchors small, silent phrases that keep you from drifting too far into the noise. They create order where there was none. It's not dramatic. It's not even conscious most of the time. But without those quiet sentences, the day would feel heavier, less manageable. So you keep talking, softly, internally, turning chaos into something you can hold. And no one knows you're doing it, because it happens in the space between action and stillness, where only you exist. A way to rehearse decisions before facing the world. Before you speak, you've already spoken. Before you act, you've already rehearsed. The conversation happens first in your head, testing words, adjusting tone, imagining how it will land. You play it out silently, over and over, until it feels right to release in the world. It's not overthinking, it's preparation, a way of protecting yourself from the uncertainty of how others will respond. You rehearse the difficult conversation. You practice the refusal. You script the explanation you'll need when someone asks, why? And in that internal rehearsal, you find a version of yourself that feels more ready. Sometimes the rehearsal is all that happens. The words never leave your mind. The decision stays internal. But even then, the act of speaking to yourself, of working through it alone, gives you something. Clarity, maybe, or just the feeling that you've already faced it once. The world doesn't see the rehearsal. It only sees the final performance. But you know how many times you practiced before stepping forward. The inner voice that explains what no one else has explained. Sometimes no one tells you why things happened the way they did. No one offers the explanation you needed. So you create it yourself. You talk through it internally, filling in the gaps with your own understanding, your own interpretation of what was left unsaid. You become your own narrator, the voice that makes sense of confusion, the one that connects the dots when others left them scattered. It's not always accurate, it's not always fair, but it's yours. And in the absence of clarity from the outside world, it's the only voice that offers any resolution at all. You explain their silence. You justify their distance. You reason through your own reactions until they feel less chaotic. The internal monologue becomes a bridge between what you experienced and what you can accept. It doesn't erase the hurt, or the confusion, but it makes it bearable. No one hears this explanation. No one validates it, but it exists anyway, quietly shaping how you move forward. The secret dialogue used to calm oneself down without outside help. When the world feels too loud, you turn inward, not to escape yourself. You speak softly to the part of you that's unraveling. You say the things no one else is there to say. It's okay. You'll get through this. Just breathe. Just wait. The words are simple, almost childlike, but they work. They slow the racing thoughts. They soften the sharp edges of panic or frustration. You become your own comfort, your own reassurance, because waiting for someone else to notice feels impossible. And sometimes you don't want to be seen falling apart, so you talk yourself down. You remind yourself of what you've survived before. You create a calm that didn't exist a moment ago. It's not a cure. It's not a solution, but it's enough to keep moving, enough to make it through the next hour, the next moment. No one knows you do this. They see the composure. They don't see the quiet conversation that held you together underneath. The mental words you speak to yourself so you don't forget who you are. There are moments when you feel yourself slipping, not into something dangerous, but into something unfamiliar, a version of yourself that doesn't quite fit. And in those moments, you speak internally, reminding yourself of who you were before the noise, before the pressure, before the world asked you to be something else. You repeat quiet truths, things you believe when no one is watching, values you don't want to lose, boundaries you've set and need to protect. The words aren't grand. They're small anchors, phrases that tether you to the person you recognize when you're alone. It's a form of self-preservation, a way of staying intact when everything around you pulls in different directions. You talk to yourself not to change, but to remain, to hold onto the core that feels true, even when it's easier to let it go. No one hears these affirmations. They're not meant to be shared. They're private declarations, spoken only to the one person who needs to hear them most. The habit of seeking advice when no advice is available. Sometimes you need guidance, but there's no one to ask. Or maybe there are people, but the question feels too small, too personal, too tangled to explain. So you become your own advisor. You sit with the problem and talk it through, weighing options, considering consequences, offering yourself the perspective you wish someone else would give. You ask yourself questions. What would make sense here? What feels right? What are you avoiding? The answers don't always come immediately, but the act of asking, of engaging with yourself, as if you were someone worth consulting, creates movement. It shifts something that was stuck. You give yourself permission to decide, to trust your own judgment, even when it feels uncertain. The internal dialogue becomes a form of counsel, imperfect, maybe, but honest. And often, that's enough, because the advice you give yourself comes from the only person who truly knows the full context. No one witnesses this process. They only see the decision you eventually make. But you know how carefully you deliberated, alone, in the quiet. A conversation with oneself that replaces missing answers. You asked a question, but no answer came. You reached out, but the silence stretched longer than expected. So you fill it yourself. You create the response you needed, speaking it internally, imagining what they might have said if they had been present, if they had cared enough to reply. It's not delusion, it's survival, a way of closing loops that were left open. You tell yourself what you wish you'd heard. You offer the reassurance, the acknowledgement, the clarity that never arrived from the outside. And even though you know it's your own voice, it still provides something, a sense of completion, however fragile. Sometimes the imagined response is kinder than reality would have been. Sometimes it's harsher, but either way, it allows you to move forward, to stop waiting for words that may never come. The conversation happens entirely within you, but it feels necessary, like the only way to let go. No one knows you've done this. They don't see the dialogue you constructed to replace their silence. But it happened, and it mattered. Thoughts spoken in silence to give meaning to what hurts. Pain doesn't always arrive with an explanation. It just sits there heavy, confusing, impossible to ignore. So you talk to it, not out loud, not to anyone else, just internally, trying to understand what it means, why it hurts the way it does, what you're supposed to do with it now. You narrate the ache. You describe it to yourself as if putting it into words might make it smaller, more manageable. You ask why it lingers. you wonder if it's teaching you something or simply taking up space. The answers don't always come, but the act of speaking to the pain of acknowledging it in your own private language makes it feel less isolating. It's a quiet form of processing, a way of sitting with discomfort without letting it consume you entirely. You don't solve it, you don't fix it, but you give it shape. You turn the formless weight into something you can at least name, even if only to yourself. No one hears this internal dialogue. They see you functioning. They don't see the silent conversation happening beneath the surface, where you're trying to make sense of what refuses to make sense. The strange intimacy of being, at the same time, the one who speaks and the one who listens. There's something unusual about talking to yourself, not the act itself, but the dynamic. You are both the one who speaks and the one who listens, the one who questions and the one who answers. You exist in two roles at once, occupying a space that belongs to no one else. It's an intimacy that feels almost paradoxical. You know exactly what you're going to say before you say it. Yet somehow, hearing it even silently still changes something. The thought becomes clearer when it's directed inward, as if the act of speaking to yourself creates a distance just wide enough to see things differently. You are your own companion in this, your own witness, and though it might seem strange to admit, there's comfort in that duality, in knowing that no matter how alone you feel, there's always one voice that will respond, one presence that never leaves. It's you, speaking softly to yourself, in a conversation that never truly ends. No one else is part of this exchange. It's the most private dialogue you'll ever have. And maybe that's why it feels so natural, because it's the one conversation where you never have to explain yourself. Talking to yourself isn't a flaw. It's not a sign of isolation or instability. It's one of the quietest, most human ways we process the world. It's how we organize chaos, rehearse courage, offer ourselves comfort, and make sense of what no one else can explain. You do it because you need to, because sometimes the only voice that can reach you is your own, and there's no shame in that. There's only honesty, the kind that exists in the space between thought and silence, where you are both the question and the answer. So if you've ever caught yourself mid-conversation with no one but yourself, know this: you're not alone in it. You're just human, and that internal dialogue, it's one of the most natural things you'll ever do. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing. There's more to explore in the quiet corners of the mind.